be. There's going to be a
We've
lot
had
of
one recessionary quarter, and I think most people ignore that.
Well,
I think we're more at risk of seeing this weakness on the revenue side than people are willing to admit to.
I totally agree with you. I think that we could be. Look, there's risk. There's up. There's high. There's up. There's the high and the low end. We all know this. There's downside. There's upside to everything. But the upsides, the tails, if you will, the fat tails have never been fatter. To use the other analogy, right? On both ends. I think they're more fatter on the negative end than they are at the high end. So I just a bunch of random things to point out, and I'll shut up. I'm sorry.
Just want to double check because we always talk about Fairfax County, Virginia, and Dave Wilson has left. I think he's always done some articles on this. To Mayor Davis's point with that we always talk about the school tax being 65% at least of the bill for the average homeowner. Fairfax County is one school district, is it not? It's one central school system.
Yes.
And I don't know the answer to this, but I think that the school district is somewhere to around a budget of around $2 billion. How does that compare, do you know, to the 40-plus school districts in Westchester? I'm just curious.
I looked at this statewide, and I looked at it in Nassau in particular a few years ago. And your question basically is the large number of school districts rather than having a countywide school district one of the key reasons for this?
Given the number
Right.
of administrators at each level within every
Right.
single school.
If you look at the data, the best data we have available from the federal government, which goes down to the school district data nationwide, and look at what central administration costs are in New York compared to the central administration is specifically the central district office, okay? Because all schools have administrators. The question is the district administration is what's duplicated when you have multiple districts. The best I can come up with is that maybe if you just assumed you eradicated all the central administration except roughly 60 of them statewide, you would maybe reduce total and made like big broad assumptions about how much that would save. I'm not going to get into specifics with you. I kind of forget but trust me on this. It was like 3%. It wasn't that much in Nassau County even, which has a lot of school districts. It is higher in New York. It's not an order of magnitude higher. It just isn't. It was there's actually maybe a diseconomy of scale. I talked to a superintendent about this once. You know that when you have one large district, that means there is one remote central administration in White Plains, okay? How lean do you think that administration would be? This is one central school administration in the McKillian building. How lean and mean do you think that group would be? Want to make any bets? Okay. The largest centrally administered school district in the world is a few miles south of here. Is it a model of educational effectiveness and administrative efficiency? Has it ever been? New York City has got 1 million students and one superintendent/chancellor. They've tried 3 different models in the last 50 years of running that place. And when they make a mistake, when they pick the wrong reading program, 1 million, 1 million kids come through a system for over 6 years, and they all have a bad reading program. Because it's one size fits all. That's the efficient thing to do, right? When they waste on an enormous scale. When they get efficient and streamlined, they do that on an enormous scale. And when they have unintended consequences, that happens on an enormous scale. There certainly would be administrative efficiencies in having fewer districts. There's also research done on this that shows that there's a sweet spot for schools, basically, that says that tiny districts can be more efficient by merging. And that really large districts can become more efficient by actually breaking up. And that mid-sized districts are probably pretty efficient. And so the bottom line is, could you have less central administrative expense in Westchester if it was one big school district? Oh, I think probably. Even with the no doubt bloated central administration office in White Plains with its regional satellite office in Peekskill. But you wouldn't say, phew, that took care of that. My tax bill is $600 lower. That would not happen. It would be, and they would find a way to eat it up. I think Mayor Davis made an excellent point from Mount Vernon about, I think that while there are things to critique, I'm sure in every city and village everywhere, all right, to the extent that even in some places public sector management or efficiency is not some sort of oxymoron, that municipalities run leaner than school districts. I think that's probably like when the mayor says, I don't know how efficiently they're, taking care of the roof. That's a very good question because, if you've ever acquainted yourself closely with how school districts run, sometimes people who manage local governments are shocked by how school districts run themselves. So I think that's a good point.
If I could just say one of the 4 out of 6 of the panelists up here are work with villages, and to that point, there probably is some sweet spot because half of the managers, no, actually most of the managers for all these villages wear multiple hats. You have one manager from the wonderful village of Pelham Manor who has multiple hats. He's filling many of the roles that are required by village law, and most of the village managers, administrators are also village clerks and carry all those other functions. And this is what we've done on the local level is we've required, in an effort to keep those personnel costs down, we've continued to ask employees to take on the additional hats. If you start to look at the tiny local governments, when you have someone where by law you have a hospital, you got to have registrars, all these time-consuming tasks. You got clerks that are taking on registrar, deputy registrar, so that
Right.
there probably is some sweet spot, but that's pretty darn.
I do think one thing is that I do think that actually the tax cap in school districts, you're seeing school districts now, I think, do things and undertake efficiencies that are kind of like what that localities, that municipalities have been doing for years. I don't know if any of the mayors want to comment on this to the extent they've seen it, but I think actually school districts are beginning to do more the sort of things that other types that regular local governments have been doing already that they had not thought of doing in previous years because the tax cap is kind of forcing it.
Well, I don't know. I think what they do is they cut out programs. They cut out band. They cut out art. They cut out because I don't think they have to dance the way politicians have to dance.
I totally agree.
And that's my problem, that they cut out things that will hurt the children in the long run.
Thomas Keller. I'm disappointed in the helplessness that the panel has expressed. Okay, pensions, I understand that. And we should have an investigation into the actuarial assumptions that DiNapoli gives us. And we know the revenue side, the smoothing over 5 years, but we don't know the other side. So you don't have control over that. But the lady from Larchmont, you're getting health care up to 25% over a number of years. That's great. Everybody should follow you. Scarsdale, I think you started it. The helplessness. It's collective bargaining. There's a Taylor law. They can't strike. Okay, you have the Triborough decision, but there are even school districts in Westchester County which ripped up the Triborough and negotiated things with the trustees of the particular school district. You can control the number of employees. You can negotiate work rules. How about a 401k, a 403b, which Cuomo almost got through when the Tier 6 was passed a few years ago? There's matching funds. The private sector in the last 25 or 30 years has eliminated defined benefit. And they're asking their employees to pay more for health care. The same should be done for municipalities. You're going to be tougher when you negotiate with unions. In Mount Vernon, as of last December, when I was complaining about your budget, Mayor, only 2 of the 4 unions paid health care. The other 2 didn't. And I don't even know how much. This is within your hands. Be tougher. Thank you.
Amen.
Can I say something about that? I appreciate the point. I think what probably has not been evident in the comments that have been made up here, because it hasn't necessarily been germane to the specific questions that have been asked, is the scope and depth of the choices that every municipality has, in fact, been required to make over the last 6 years. I mean, New Rochelle's example, I would guess, is probably typical. We have our smallest workforce in a generation. We have refinanced debt. We have canceled programs. We have scaled back capital expenditures. We are changing our service delivery portfolio in ways that results in significant public pushback. We have long-term contracts that are at a much reduced total compensation growth rate from what we've seen historically. So, we've all been through a fiscal meat grinder that has necessitated some very tough choices and that have resulted in a cost structure that is considerably lower than we would have been if past trend lines had simply been extended. Now, people can argue and disagree about whether that's adequate or inadequate, whether the choices were wise or unwise, whether more should have been done or less should have been done. But if we have given you the impression that our attitude has been to sort of sit by helplessly in a world that is constructed by others and simply lament our inability to do anything, that is far afield from the reality of the choices that each of us have been required to make over the last few years.
Excuse me, can I respond to that?
You might guess.
I don't live in New Rochelle. I live in Mount Vernon. I like where I live. But you pay yourself $90,000, ceremonial job. The village manager, the city manager gets $180,000. Can't you combine it? Can't you force the people in New Rochelle to go to a strong mayor type of government? And why did you give pilots going to 2029 and 2039 for those high-rise buildings in downtown White Plains, downtown New Rochelle? They already got pilots over 10 years. You extended them 20 or 30 years.
We did in order to have a growing economy that benefits taxpayers.
And all the renters in those buildings send their kids to the schools and they don't pay anything in taxes, relatively speaking.
You're mistaken.
Our next question.
My name is Maggie Klein.
I'm sorry, Maggie. I do want to make a point. I'm going to answer the question that you asked me before, about a negotiation. It's kind of responsive. I actually, maybe I'm smarter than I think, because I actually went into a negotiation trying to be tough and said, here is total compensation. I don't care about salary. The number that matters is what's all in. And when we look at what's all in, and we look at the step increases that are in the agreement, when we look at, because people move up in seniority, when we look at what's built in terms of pension, I said, we really, you were already